Welcome everyone to our late night emotional storytelling channel. Hope you enjoy listening to the stories. Please subscribe to the channel to receive the latest videos from us. The late afternoon sun cast long, slanting shadows across the manicured lawn of my estate, and I stood there, barefoot on the cool marble of the back veranda, a glass of wine in hand, watching the way the light made the leaves shimmer. There was a strange kind of loneliness that clung to moments like this. Beautiful, perfect, and utterly hollow. I was 38 years old, and for the past 15 years, I had lived in a gilded cage. The house was enormous, the gardens flawless, the parties opulent, but none of it belonged to me, not in any way that mattered. I was a name on a charity board, a smile at gala events, a well-dressed figure at Richard's side. My husband, Richard Whitmore, a man people either envied or feared. I took a slow sip of the Chardonnay, its crispness catching at the back of my throat. From the corner of my eye, movement caught my attention. A man working by the fence. I hadn't noticed him before. He wasn't one of the regular groundskeepers. Tall, broad-shouldered, tanned skin that glistened under the sun, a sheen of sweat along the curve of his neck. He wore an old white t-shirt, the fabric clinging to his back as he reached up to hammer a loose plank into place. Faded denim jeans hugged his hips, frayed at the hem. I don't know why I kept watching. Maybe it was the way his body moved. Efficient, unhurried, powerful. Or maybe it was the look in his eyes when he turned briefly, catching sight of me as if sensing the weight of my gaze. He didn't look away. Most men either stared or quickly dropped their eyes. He did neither. His gaze held mine, steady, unreadable, and something inside my chest tightened. I should have walked inside. I should have set down the glass and gone back to pretending my life was enough. But I didn't. Instead, I set the wineglass aside and almost without thinking, walked barefoot down the steps, letting the long hem of my silk dress trail behind me like a liquid shadow. The air smelled of cut grass and summer heat. My heart beat too fast for no reason I wanted to admit. As I drew closer, he straightened, wiping the back of his hand across his brow, smearing a line of dust. Up close, he was even more striking. Mid-30s, maybe a few years younger than me, with dark hair curling at the nape of his neck and storm gray eyes. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, his voice a deep, rough timbre that brushed along my skin like coarse silk. Ma'am. God. It made me feel older and younger all at once. "I don't think we've met," I said, my voice softer than I intended, almost hesitant. "I'm Lucy." He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "Dylan," he replied, "just here to fix that fence." Of course, I should have known. But knowing didn't make it any easier to tear my eyes away from the line of his jaw, the sweat-darkened fabric of his shirt, or the way his fingers, broad, calloused, capable, wrapped around the hammer. "Well," I gestured vaguely, meaning to be polite, to leave, but finding myself rooted in place. You look like you're making good progress." A small smile ghosted across his mouth, one corner lifting in a way that felt like a secret. "Trying to, ma'am." "Lucy," I corrected again. And this time, something flickered in those gray eyes. I should have left then. But the truth was, a part of me had already crossed a line the moment I stepped off the veranda. I don't know how long we stood there, the two of us. Him holding a hammer in his hand, sweat tracing the lines of his jaw, and me, standing too close, feeling the thud of my pulse beneath the silence. Something between us hummed, an energy I couldn't shake off, as if the very air had changed the moment I stepped off that porch. Dylan's gaze never wavered. It was like a quiet challenge, something unspoken, but clear all the same. He didn't look at me like other men did. He didn't seem afraid to see me, to really see me. And I hated how much that unsettled me, how much I liked it. I caught myself shifting uncomfortably on the balls of my feet, then forced myself to stand still, reminding myself that I was Lucy Whitmore. I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't need to make small talk with a man who worked for us. This was all an accident, a momentary lapse. But I could still feel the heat radiating from him. The way his muscles moved beneath his shirt, the faintest hint of a smile on his lips that felt too knowing. I should have walked away. I should have gone back inside, but instead, I found my mouth moving again. "Are you new around here?" I asked, my voice oddly tight. He nodded once, stepping back to inspect the fence, his hands brushing against the rough wood. "Just started a couple weeks ago," he said, his voice low but steady. "Figured I'd stick around. Looks like you need someone with a steady hand." His words hung in the air, almost too intimate for the setting, as if he wasn't just talking about the fence, but about something else, something between us, that invisible thread I hadn't even realized existed until that moment. "You've done a good job so far," I said, trying to sound casual, but there was a tremor in my voice that I couldn't hide. For a moment, he didn't answer. Instead, he set the hammer down, wiping his brow again, and then finally, he looked at me. Really looked at me. His gaze lingered on my face, my lips, and I felt it, the pull, the heat that seemed to gather between us, like a storm on the horizon. "You're different," he said softly, his eyes dropping to the ground, almost as if he realized he'd said too much. But the words hung in the air, vibrating with a truth that stung. He was right. I was different. Not like the other women in this town who went to the country club and baked cookies for their husbands. I was more. I needed more. I felt my breath catch in my throat, and I hated how exposed I felt. It was ridiculous, the way this man, a stranger, could make me feel this way with just a look. "I'm not," I began, but he interrupted me, his voice quieter, firmer. "You don't need to explain yourself," he said. "I can tell." And I could see it now, the way he saw me, not just as Lucy Whitmore, the well-dressed wife of a wealthy businessman, but as something real, something raw. I felt my chest tighten, a mixture of fear and longing swirling inside me. I wanted to step back, to pull away from him, but I couldn't. I felt anchored to this moment, to him, to the way his presence made everything else seem so insignificant. I wanted to say something, anything to break the tension, but the words caught in my throat. And then, almost without thinking, I did something I never would have imagined myself doing. I stepped forward. I didn't know why. Maybe it was the way the sunlight hit his face, making his features more striking. Or maybe it was the way he hadn't flinched when our gazes met. But in that instant, something inside me broke, and I let myself close the distance. "You should come back inside," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Have a drink with me." It was bold, reckless, and I knew it. But in the back of my mind, a voice whispered that I had already crossed the line. I had already let myself want this, want him. He didn't answer right away, just stood there looking at me, his eyes unreadable. I saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his hand flexed around the hammer. It was like he was fighting something inside himself. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "I'll come in." We moved through the house like shadows, him following behind me, his presence heavy and unsettling. The moment we crossed the threshold, I felt a surge of adrenaline, my heart pounding in my chest, my palms suddenly slick with sweat. I led him into the living room, my eyes briefly flicking over to the grand piano in the corner, the sparkling crystal chandelier overhead. This was my world. Clean, controlled, beautiful. And yet, in that moment, it felt cold and empty. I moved to the bar, hands shaking slightly as I poured 2 glasses of wine. Red, bold, strong, just like the feelings swirling inside me. When I handed him his glass, our fingers brushed, and I felt the spark. It was electric, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. He didn't apologize. He didn't look away. He just held my gaze. We stood there for a moment, neither of us speaking, as if we both knew that this moment was inevitable, that something between us had already begun, something that would never go back to what it was. The wine was smooth, but it did nothing to ease the tension in the room. I could feel the heat of Dylan's gaze on me, burning through the air like a wildfire. The glass of wine trembled slightly in my hand as I lowered it to the table, but I didn't drink. I was too aware of him, of us. Everything was different now, and I couldn't escape it. Dylan, still standing at the far side of the room, seemed content to let the silence stretch. There was something about him that made it easy to just let go, to let the unspoken things linger in the air, heavy and unacknowledged. His eyes moved around the room, scanning the high-end decor, the plush sofas, the elegant design of the space. He seemed so out of place here, yet at the same time, he didn't. The contrast only heightened the tension. He was the kind of man who didn't belong in spaces like this, but somehow he made it feel real, more real than any of the luxuries that filled this house. "You live in a beautiful house," he finally said, his voice steady, but laced with something deeper. I felt my breath hitch in my throat. "It's just a house," I replied, but the words felt hollow coming out. I knew the truth. This house was a monument to a life that no longer made sense to me, a life that felt more like a performance than reality. He stepped closer, slow, measured. I didn't stop him. Part of me wanted him to. Part of me was terrified of what would happen if he did. "You're not just a house, though," he said, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. "I can tell there's more to you than all this." I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. "What do you mean by that?" He was standing close now, close enough for me to feel the heat of his body, close enough for me to breathe in his scent, that heady mix of wood and musk and something more, something animalistic. My pulse quickened, and for a split second, I forgot to care about the boundaries between us. "I mean that you're not what you appear to be," Dylan said, his words hanging in the air like a challenge. "You've got a fire inside of you. I can see it. It's hard to hide something like that." I didn't know how to respond. The weight of his words hung between us, a dare, a promise. And without thinking, I took a step toward him. The space between us vanished, and his hands moved instinctively to my waist, pulling me close. There was no hesitation, no fear, just raw electric energy that surged between us, a magnetic force we couldn't ignore. I could feel his breath against my skin, and it was like I was falling into him, into the moment, into everything I had spent years avoiding. I raised my hand to his chest, my fingers grazing over the solid muscle beneath his shirt, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let go. I let go of the carefully constructed walls I'd built around myself. I let go of everything. Dylan's lips found mine, his kiss hungry and urgent, as if he had been waiting for this moment just as long as I had. There was no slow build-up, no hesitation, just heat, intensity. It was like a dam breaking, a flood of emotions rushing through me all at once. My hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, as if I couldn't get enough of him. And in that moment, I didn't care about the consequences. I didn't care about anything except the way he made me feel. Alive, seen, powerful. And so far from the woman I had been before he stepped into my life. We stumbled toward the couch, falling together in a tangle of limbs, our bodies pressing against each other with a need that couldn't be denied. He kissed me again, more fiercely this time, his hands roaming over my body with a kind of urgency I hadn't known I needed. His touch was demanding, possessive, and it sent a shiver of excitement down my spine. "Lucy," he whispered, his voice rough against my ear. "Tell me you want this." I didn't hesitate. "I want this," I breathed, the words spilling out before I could think better of them. The moment I said it, everything changed. There was no turning back now. This wasn't just about desire anymore. This was something deeper, something that had been building between us from the moment we met. A connection that neither of us could deny. His hands moved to the hem of my dress, lifting it slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the moment. I felt my skin prickle with anticipation, every nerve in my body alert to the sensation of his touch. But even as my heart raced, even as I felt my body reacting to him in ways I couldn't control, a part of me was still questioning. What am I doing? This is wrong. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter because when he touched me, all I could think about was him. All I could think about was how good it felt to give in, to let go, to feel wanted. The fabric of my dress pooled around my waist, and I felt the cool air against my skin. Dylan's hands were on me again, sliding over my curves, pulling me closer. His lips trailed down my neck, leaving a path of fire in their wake. I gasped, my hands running over his back, feeling the tension in his muscles as he moved with me, his movements as much a part of me as my own. Everything else faded. The house, the life I had built, the guilt, the fear, none of it mattered anymore. It was just the two of us, caught in a storm of passion that neither of us could escape. I woke up the next morning with the feeling of his hands still on me, the lingering warmth of his touch beneath my skin. The room was still, quiet, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself that nothing had changed, that I could go back to the way things were before. But then I heard the sound of the front door closing, and I knew that this was real, that Dylan was real, that everything I had done, everything I had felt was real. And there was no going back now. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows, casting long, pale beams across the room. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that clings to you, heavy and intrusive, reminding you of everything you wish you could forget. I sat on the edge of the bed, the sheets still tangled from the night before, my skin marked with the memory of his touch. I reached out, tracing my fingers along the faint indent on the pillow where his head had rested. It was still warm when I woke, but now it was cold, and I hated how empty it made me feel. I told myself this was a mistake. Over and over, the words played like a mantra in my mind. This was a mistake, Lucy. You have a husband, a life, a name to protect. But no matter how many times I whispered those words into the still air, it didn't change what I felt. I glanced toward the door, half expecting Dylan to walk back in, to say something, anything. But he was gone, vanished like smoke, leaving only the ache in my chest and the fire he'd ignited deep inside me. I closed my eyes and let the memory of his hands on my body wash over me. His lips trailing down my neck, the rough scrape of his stubble against my skin, the way his body pressed against mine like he was trying to claim every inch of me. I hated how good it felt to remember, and I hated that, even now, I craved it. I stood and crossed the room to the window, pulling the curtains aside. Outside, the world looked so normal. The garden was bathed in soft light, the trimmed hedges perfectly in place, the fountain quietly trickling water into its stone basin. My life, from the outside, appeared immaculate, untouched, but inside was a storm. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, my breath fogging a small circle on its surface. What am I doing? I thought again, but the answer never came. Maybe because deep down I already knew. It wasn't just about loneliness. It wasn't just about the absence of touch or the emptiness of a marriage that had long ago become a performance. It was about something far more dangerous. It was about wanting to feel alive, and Dylan made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. I closed my eyes and let out a shaky breath. I could still smell him on my skin, a mix of earth, sweat, and something so primal, it made my pulse quicken just thinking about it. I should have felt ashamed. I didn't. I made myself coffee, though my hands shook as I poured it. I kept glancing at my phone, half hoping for a message, a missed call, a sign, but nothing came. The housekeeper, Marisol, arrived at 8 sharp, her presence a reminder of the roles we played in this grand, hollow house. She greeted me with a kind smile, unaware of the chaos roiling just beneath my skin. "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore," she chirped. "Would you like me to set up breakfast out on the terrace?" I forced a smile. "No, thank you, Marisol. I'm not hungry this morning." It was a lie. I was starving, but not for food. I left the house soon after, slipping into my car and driving aimlessly through the winding roads of the hills, past vineyards and sprawling estates, until I ended up at the small town square miles away. Somewhere no one knew my name. Somewhere no one would recognize me. I parked and sat there for a long time, my fingers tracing the steering wheel, my mind replaying the night before, like a movie on an endless loop. I thought about his hands, his mouth, the way he'd said my name. I pressed my thighs together at the memory, ashamed at how quickly my body betrayed me. I needed to stop this. I needed to forget, but I knew I wouldn't. I didn't want to. 2 days passed. I kept expecting him to show up again, to call, to send a message. But nothing came. It gnawed at me, this silence. I wasn't used to wanting something I couldn't have. By the 3rd day, I convinced myself it was over. A momentary lapse, a mistake neither of us would speak of again. And then, at midnight, my phone buzzed. A single message. "Come to the barn." No name, no pretense. But I knew exactly who it was from. And without hesitation, without a second thought, I was already reaching for my coat. The night air was cool against my skin, my pulse racing as I drove down the narrow dirt road toward the edge of the estate. The old barn loomed ahead, its silhouette sharp against the moonlit sky. I killed the engine and stepped out, my heels crunching against the gravel. Every nerve in my body screamed that this was reckless, stupid, dangerous. But I didn't care. I pushed the door open, the heavy wood groaning in protest, and slipped inside. And there he was, Dylan, leaning against a post, a cigarette between his fingers, his gaze shadowed but unmistakable. Neither of us spoke. I took a step toward him, and another. He dropped the cigarette to the ground, crushing it beneath his boot, and crossed the space between us in 2 strides. His hand tangled in my hair, and his mouth was on mine before I could even take a breath. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't careful, it was raw, desperate, the kind of kiss that burned through your soul and left you gasping for more. I clung to him, my body molding to his, my fingers digging into his shoulders. The taste of smoke and want on his lips made my head spin. His voice was a low growl against my ear. I told myself I wasn't gonna do this again. Then don't, I whispered, though my nails dragged down his back, betraying the lie in my words. He gripped my face, forcing me to meet his gaze. But I can't stop thinking about you, Lucy. My breath hitched, and then he was lifting me, my legs wrapping around his waist and carrying me deeper into the shadows of the barn. The air inside the barn was thick, heavy with the scent of hay, old wood, and something darker, something wild. His grip tightened around my hips as he set me down onto a pile of faded blankets, his mouth never leaving mine. I could barely breathe, and I didn't want to. I wanted to drown in this, in him, in the dangerous, reckless hunger that had been gnawing at me since the moment he first stepped onto my property. He kissed me like a man starved, like he'd been holding back for far too long. And I met him with equal fervor, my fingers fumbling with the buttons of his shirt, desperate to feel his skin against mine. I tried to stay away, he murmured against my throat, his breath hot and ragged. Tried to forget what it felt like to have you. A sharp, aching sound escaped me as his teeth grazed my collarbone. I didn't want you to, I whispered, my voice a broken confession in the dark. His hands were everywhere, sliding beneath my blouse, cupping my breasts, tracing the curve of my waist. Every touch left me burning, every kiss stealing the air from my lungs. I arched against him, needing more, needing all of him. Clothes fell away in frantic motions. His shirt, my silk blouse, the delicate lace of my bra. Each piece discarded without care, until there was nothing between us but skin and heat and need. He paused for a moment, his hand cradling my jaw, his eyes searching mine in the dim light. Tell me to stop, he rasped. Say it, and I will. I could barely form words. I shook my head. Don't you dare. And then he was inside me, and the world disappeared. There were no husbands, no promises, no names. Only us. Only this. The barn echoed with the sharp, breathless sounds of our bodies colliding. His name fell from my lips again and again, a prayer, a curse, a desperate plea. He drove into me with a force that bordered on savage, but it was exactly what I needed. What I'd been craving in the hollow quiet of my perfect, empty house. His hands tangled in my hair, his mouth devouring mine. I clung to him like a woman drowning, my nails raking across his back, drawing shallow lines that only made him groan and thrust harder. Every movement, every sound, was a defiance of the world we came from. And when release finally crashed over me, it tore through me like a storm, leaving me gasping, trembling in his arms, He followed seconds later, his body shuddering against mine, a low, raw sound escaping his throat. For a long moment, neither of us moved. We just stayed like that, tangled together on the worn blankets, the weight of what we'd done settling heavy in the quiet. I should have felt guilt, but all I felt was him, his skin against mine, his breath in my hair, the ache between my thighs. I never wanted it to end. We didn't speak as we dressed. The silence between us was thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, like the aftermath of a storm when the air still crackles with electricity. He buttoned his shirt with slow, deliberate movements, his gaze flickering to me now and then, as if he couldn't quite believe I was real. I pulled on my blouse, my hands trembling slightly. My hair was a mess, my skin flushed, and I knew I looked every bit the woman who'd just betrayed everything she was supposed to stand for. And I didn't care. When I reached the door, he caught my wrist. "Lucy." I turned, my breath catching at the raw emotion in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said softly, like a promise. I didn't answer. I didn't have to, because we both knew it was true. I drove home in the dark, my body still humming from his touch. The house was as silent as ever. The only sound was the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I climbed the stairs on unsteady legs, slipping into the bedroom where my husband lay sleeping. His face was peaceful, untouched by suspicion, his breathing slow and even. I stood there for a long moment, watching him. He didn't stir, didn't sense the storm that had blown through his life. I slid beneath the covers, my body still carrying the scent of another man, my skin tingling from every place Dylan's hands had been. I stared up at the ceiling, my heart pounding in my chest. And I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The days that followed felt like I was living in two different worlds. In one, I was Lucy Ann Whitmore, the polished, graceful wife of a powerful man, attending charity luncheons, sipping wine at garden parties, smiling for cameras while discussing trivial things like summer galas and art auctions. In the other, I was his, a woman I barely recognized, a creature of hunger and impulse, willing to risk everything for stolen hours in the dark. And it terrified me how easily I moved between the two, how natural the lies felt on my tongue. I'm meeting Catherine for lunch. I have to drive into the city for a gallery opening. I'm feeling a little unwell. I think I'll stay home today. Each excuse smoother than the last, each deception a little easier to sell. And all of it, every single word, was so I could find my way back to him. The second time happened in the middle of the afternoon, a hot, breathless summer day when the air clung to your skin like a second layer. I told my driver I wanted to walk the estate grounds alone. He didn't question it. I made my way to the guest cottage, my pulse pounding in my ears. He was waiting. I didn't knock, didn't hesitate. The moment the door closed behind me, his hands were on me, my back pressed against the wall, his mouth claiming mine in a way that made my knees threaten to give out. "I've been going insane," he growled against my lips. "Every second you're not here." I couldn't answer, couldn't think. I just reached for him, pulling his shirt over his head, my fingers desperate, greedy for his heat, his skin. We didn't make it to the bed. He took me right there against the wall. Fast, fierce, a frenzied claiming that left me shaking, sobbing his name into his shoulder as I shattered around him. And when it was over, neither of us spoke, because there was nothing left to say. I would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my body aching in places it hadn't for years. Dreams of him, of his hands, his mouth, his voice rough in my ear, whispering things no one had ever dared say to me. And beside me, my husband would sleep on, oblivious. I began to resent him for that, for his ignorance, for the way he looked at me like I was still the same woman he'd married. When I wasn't, not anymore. I was something darker now, something dangerous, and I was starting to love it. There were days I promised myself it was over, that the next time Edward kissed my cheek before leaving for work, I'd come clean. Or at the very least, end whatever this was with Dylan before it consumed me whole. But every time I tried, one look from him, those impossible eyes, that lazy, reckless grin, and my resolve crumbled like ash in my hands. And I hated myself for it. Hated how I'd become the kind of woman I used to pity at garden parties. The ones you could always tell were hiding something beneath perfect hair and designer sunglasses. I understood them now. That constant ache in your chest, the way your skin burned to be touched, even when it shouldn't, the thrill and terror of secrets. God help me, I was addicted to it. It wasn't just lust anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was in the way he knew exactly when to touch me without words, how his hand would find the small of my back when no one was looking, how his fingers would graze mine for a half second too long, sending a pulse of heat straight to my stomach. And the way he looked at me, like I was a storm he'd willingly drown in. I never had to pretend with him, never had to smile when I didn't want to, or be charming, or clever, or perfect. I could be reckless, needy, dark. And God, it felt good. The next time was in his truck. A storm was breaking overhead, thunder rumbling low and heavy in the distance. I was supposed to be at an art benefit. I left halfway through, my skin itching with the weight of small talk and fake laughter. I texted him, "Where are you?" His reply came seconds later. 5 minutes from you. Wait. I slipped out the side entrance, my pulse skittering like a drumbeat beneath my ribs. His headlights found me at the edge of the gravel drive. I climbed in without a word. He didn't ask, didn't speak, just drove. Out past the tree line, where no one would see, where the world felt like it belonged only to us. When he stopped the truck, the rain was coming down in sheets. I didn't care. I climbed into his lap, my dress tangling around my thighs, his hands burying in my hair as he kissed me like he was starving. It was wild, clumsy, desperate. The cab fogged with our breath, the storm outside roaring around us, and I let myself get lost in it. In him. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like Lucy Ann Whitmore. I felt alive. The next time was in his truck. A storm was breaking overhead, thunder rumbling low and heavy in the distance. I was supposed to be at an art benefit. I left halfway through, my skin itching with the weight of small talk and fake laughter. I texted him, "Where are you?" His reply came seconds later. 5 minutes from you. Wait. I slipped out the side entrance, my pulse skittering like a drumbeat beneath my ribs. His headlights found me at the edge of the gravel drive. I climbed in without a word. He didn't ask, didn't speak, just drove. Out past the tree line, where no one would see, where the world felt like it belonged only to us. When he stopped the truck, the rain was coming down in sheets. I didn't care. I climbed into his lap, my dress tangling around my thighs, his hands burying in my hair as he kissed me like he was starving. It was wild, clumsy, desperate. The cab fogged with our breath, the storm outside roaring around us, and I let myself get lost in it, in him. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like Lucy Ann Whitmore. I felt alive. After that night in the truck, something shifted between us. It wasn't spoken. We were never the type to waste words on what was already obvious. But there was a new edge to it now, a hunger that bordered on reckless. Like we both knew we were inching closer to a line we wouldn't be able to uncross. And neither of us gave a damn. Every glance, every accidental touch was loaded. An unspoken promise, a dare. It was maddening. I found myself inventing reasons to leave the house, to drive by the guest cottage, to pass through the stables, knowing he might be there. And when our eyes met, those impossible, soul-stripping eyes, it was a free fall. No safety net, no brakes, just this devastating, beautiful crash we were both racing toward. One evening, after a particularly suffocating dinner party, I slipped out while Edward was still laughing with a group of men over brandy. I walked down to the far field, where the land dipped into shadow, where Dylan had said he'd be finishing repairs on the old storage shed. My heart was pounding long before I saw him. And when I did, leaning against the doorway, shirt half unbuttoned, moonlight catching on his skin, I stopped breathing altogether. He said nothing as I approached, just reached out, caught my wrist, and pulled me into the dark. The door closed behind us, the scent of wood and earth thick in the air. And then his mouth was on mine, rough, unapologetic, as if we'd both held it in for too long. I fisted my hands in his hair, pulling him closer, tasting rain on his lips. He lifted me without effort, my back pressed to the wall, his hips pinning me there. I was already trembling, already lost. And when he pushed inside me, hot, deep, possessive, I broke, bit down on his shoulder to keep from crying out. It was messy, violent, perfect. And when it was over, we stayed tangled there in the dark, breathless and ruined, because neither of us was ready to let go. Not yet. The guilt would come later. It always did. In the cold clarity of dawn, when I'd wash his scent from my skin and slip back into silk and diamonds, rehearsing the lies I'd need to carry me through the day. But in those moments with him, skin to skin, breath to breath, I didn't care. I didn't care about the house, the money, the name I was married into. None of it meant anything compared to the way he made me feel. Wild, unhinged, undone. And every time I promised it was the last, I knew I was lying. Because the truth was simple. I would always go back. The nights grew longer. The lies grew easier. I told myself it was survival, that a woman like me, trapped in a life built on appearances and polite deceit, was entitled to her own private sin. But the truth was far darker. I craved him. Not just his hands, his mouth, his body, though God knows those too, but the way he looked at me, like he saw every fractured, ruined part and wanted them anyway. I was addicted to the ache of it, the danger, the brutal sweetness of it all. One Sunday afternoon, with Edward off at a charity golf tournament, Dylan showed up at the house. It was reckless, stupid. I should have sent him away. I didn't. I let him in through the side entrance, my pulse a steady roar in my ears. We barely made it to the study before his hands were in my hair, his mouth devouring mine, and I was fumbling at his belt like a woman possessed. I couldn't get enough of him, his taste, his heat, his reckless, beautiful violence. He lifted me onto Edward's desk, scattering papers and crystal frames to the floor, and took me there against the oak, the chandelier above us swaying with every thrust. I bit down on my lip to keep from crying out his name, nails raking down his back, my heart slamming against my ribs like it might shatter through bone. It was madness. Perfect, delicious madness. And I never wanted it to end. Afterward, we lay tangled in the heavy leather chair, the room smelling of sex and old books, rain streaking the window glass. I traced the scar on his shoulder with my fingertip. "How'd you get this?" I asked, my voice raw. He didn't answer for a while, then quietly, "Fell off a roof. Thought I could fly." I smiled, reckless. He caught my hand, brought it to his lips. "Only when it comes to you." And in that moment, with my head on his chest, the world silent around us, I realized how deeply, stupidly in love with him I was. How dangerous it had become. How utterly impossible it would be to stop. The weeks bled into one another after that. Every glance, every brush of his fingers against mine in passing, felt like a spark set to dry timber. I could feel myself unraveling, thread by thread. And the terrifying part was, I wanted to. I wanted to see how far we could fall before the world noticed. Before someone pulled the curtain back and found us tangled together in the dark. And even knowing the ruin it would bring, I would have let it happen. Gladly. One evening, Edward announced he'd be traveling to New York for 4 days. Business meetings, fundraisers, dinners with men whose names I barely remembered, and whose wives smiled at me with polite detachment. I nodded, kissed his cheek, and pretended to care. But inside, my pulse was a steady, brutal drumbeat. 4 days, 4 nights, an eternity, or not nearly enough. The moment his car left the driveway, Dylan was at the door. No words, no hesitation. I opened the door and he stepped inside, closing it behind him with a finality that stole my breath. I could barely lock it before he had me pressed against it, his mouth claiming mine, his hands tugging at the silk of my dress. We didn't make it upstairs, didn't even make it to the living room. Right there in the entry hall, with the scent of rain clinging to his skin, he took me. His mouth was everywhere, my throat, my breasts, my stomach, leaving a trail of bruised, tender skin in his wake. I'd never felt so alive, so utterly, devastatingly wanted. Those 4 days blurred into one fevered stretch of skin and heat and quiet, stolen laughter. We barely left the house. We made love in every room, on the staircase, in the sun-drenched kitchen, on the grand piano Edward had bought and never played. There was no shame in it anymore. No careful glances or hurried goodbyes. Just us, raw, unfiltered, unforgivable. And God help me, I loved every ruinous second of it. On the 3rd night, as a storm rattled the windows and the fire crackled low, he held me in bed, my head on his chest, and said quietly, "I'm gonna take you away from this, Lucy." I closed my eyes, because I wanted him to mean it, more than I wanted to breathe, and I was so afraid that he did. The storm outside matched the war inside my chest. I could feel it, the inevitable pull of consequence, inching closer, the sharp taste of danger in every kiss, every reckless word whispered in the dark. But I didn't stop, couldn't. His hands slid over my skin like a man memorizing every inch, and I let him. I clung to him like a drowning woman, desperate for air and terrified of the surface. "I want to leave with you," I whispered against his throat, his hand stilled on my hip. "You mean it?" I nodded. God, I meant it. In that moment, I would have burned it all to the ground for him. The house, the name, the life I'd spent years pretending to love. I would have left it smoldering behind me and never looked back. He kissed me then, slow and deep, and I felt something break loose inside me. A tether snapped, a promise abandoned. It was done. There was no turning back now. The next morning, reality clawed its way back in. A phone call from Edward, a neighbor's visit, the housekeeper's wary glance, the world reminding me I still belonged to it. But inside, I was gone, already his, already lost. Dylan left before dawn, promising to return after dark. And I counted every hour, every unbearable minute, until he did. That evening I stood by the window, watching the last light bleed from the sky. The house felt too quiet, every shadow too deep, every room too vast. I was no longer the woman who once moved through this space with grace and certainty. I was someone else now, someone reckless, someone desperate. And as the clock struck 10, I heard his truck pull into the driveway. The sound of his boots on the stone path. My heart lurched. I met him at the door. Neither of us spoke. Words were useless now. He lifted me into his arms, carried me upstairs without breaking eye contact, and laid me down on the bed like I was something fragile. But his mouth was anything but gentle. The hunger between us had sharpened into something fierce and possessive. His hands bruised my skin, and I welcomed it, because pain was better than the emptiness waiting on the other side. Afterward, we lay tangled in the sheets, the storm of our bodies finally quiet, though the storm outside still raged. "I don't want to be a secret anymore," he said, voice rough. I turned to him, my heart hammering. "I don't know how to fix this, Dylan." He propped himself on one elbow, his gaze so steady it felt like it could unmake me. "Then let's not fix it. Let's burn it down." I swallowed hard. A part of me wanted to scream yes. Another part, the small sliver of Lucy, who once hosted charity galas and smiled at hollow compliments, hesitated. But that part was dying. Dylan could see it too. He leaned closer. "I'll wait, but not forever." The following morning, Edward's flight was delayed by a day. Panic threaded through me. Dylan and I had promised ourselves that last night would be the final one, before we figured out a way to leave this place behind. Now, time was betraying us. I spent the day pacing, my nerves a frayed wire. The phone rang. Neighbors dropped by. The housekeeper asked odd questions. I felt the walls closing in, but I clung to one thing. Tonight, he'd come, and we'd decide everything. The night came too slowly, and when it did, it brought a terrible electric tension, a sense that the world itself was holding its breath. Dylan's truck wasn't in the driveway. The clock struck 9, then 10, then midnight. Nothing. No headlights, no footsteps, no knock. I sat by the window until the sky paled with dawn, my heart a hollow, aching thing in my chest. He never came. I called his phone. No answer. I drove past his workshop. Empty. I asked around town, pretending casual concern. No one had seen him. The world felt like it was unraveling. And inside me, something cracked. A terror I couldn't name took root. I was losing him. Not to another woman, not to regret, but to something worse, to absence, to silence, to that yawning, merciless unknown. The days bled together after that. I couldn't eat, could barely sleep. Every sound outside made my heart leap, only to crash when it wasn't him. Edward returned, bringing with him the familiar scent of expensive cologne and the icy chill of indifference. He barely noticed the haunted look in my eyes, the weight I'd lost, the way my hands trembled when I poured his scotch. I played my part, perfect wife, flawless hostess. But inside, I was unraveling. Dylan was gone, and no one seemed to care. I began leaving notes under the stone by his workshop. Desperate, trembling scrawls. "Where are you? Please come back. I need you." But the notes remained untouched. I went to his favorite bar, his old fishing spot by the lake, the abandoned barn where we once made love under a stormy sky. Nothing. Only absence. Only silence. And in that silence, my guilt grew claws. Maybe this was punishment. Maybe I was meant to drown in the emptiness I'd created. One evening, 3 weeks after he vanished, I found a letter on my porch. No name, no return address, just my name, written in his rough, unmistakable hand. My fingers shook as I tore it open. The words were simple. I had to leave. It wasn't safe, for either of us. I'll love you until my last breath. Forget me if you can. Tears blurred the ink. My chest ached with a pain I didn't think a human heart could survive. I read it a dozen times, tracing the letters with my fingertips as though I could summon him back through sheer will. But he was gone, and I was still here, trapped, alone, married, broken. In the months that followed, I existed in a kind of numb haze. I smiled when expected, attended charity luncheons, took Edward's arm at fundraisers. But inside, I was a ghost. No one noticed. Or if they did, they didn't care. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear a truck in the distance and my heart would leap. But it was never him. I kept his letter in the drawer by my bed, read it like a prayer, a curse, a tether to a life I'd tasted but could never claim. And the ache of it, the sharp, aching hunger of it, never dulled. It was a year later when I first saw him again. I was driving down the highway, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting golden light over everything, making the world look like it belonged in a dream. And there, by the side of the road, stood Dylan. He was leaning against the old fence by the farm, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, his stance casual, like he had all the time in the world. But I knew better. I slammed the brakes so hard, I thought the car would spin out of control. My hands shook as I climbed out of the car, my pulse pounding in my ears. He turned slowly as I approached, his face unreadable, his presence as magnetic and dangerous as I remembered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He wasn't the man I had known, and I wasn't the woman who had loved him. But the tension, the hunger, the need, all of it rushed back, and I was swallowed by the gravity of it all. "I thought you were gone for good," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I never left," he replied, his voice low, like gravel. He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "I had to disappear, Lucy. You were the last thing I wanted to hurt. But I can't stay away from you anymore." I felt my knees weaken, the way his presence consumed me, how every inch of him called out to me. I couldn't fight it. I don't know what to do," I murmured, my voice barely a whisper. "I can't go back to what we had, Dylan." His hand reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "We don't have to go back. We can only move forward, whatever that means." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything that had passed between us. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to beg him to stay, but my heart, twisted by the complexity of it all, wouldn't allow me. We sat together in the old barn by the lake, the place where it all began. The moonlight poured in through the cracks in the wood, bathing us in a soft, silver glow. It felt surreal, like a dream I couldn't escape, like a life that wasn't mine, but that I kept chasing. Dylan was close, too close. I could feel the heat of his body next to mine. hear the steady beat of his heart, a rhythm that echoed mine. "I can't keep doing this," I whispered, looking away, unable to meet his gaze. He reached for my hand, and the simple touch sent a shiver through me. "Then we stop, but only if you tell me you're done," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "Tell me you don't want me, Lucy, and I'll walk away." I closed my eyes, the decision suffocating me. I could say it, I could lie, but I didn't want to. The truth hung in the air like a promise and a curse. "I never stopped wanting you," I breathed, my voice breaking. Dylan's hand cupped my cheek, his thumb brushing against my skin. "Then come with me. Now we don't have time to waste anymore." I stood there, my heart torn between two worlds. The life I had built with Edward, the security, the stability, the facade I had perfected for so long, and the burning, reckless love I shared with Dylan, the man who made me feel more alive than I ever had before. But as I looked at him, his eyes, full of something I couldn't name, something fierce, something raw, I knew what I had to do. I kissed him, and in that kiss, I made my choice. We walked away from everything, the house, the promises, the lies. The morning after, I woke up to an empty bed. I knew the life we had chosen would catch up with us. I knew the consequences would come. But for that one perfect moment, I felt free. And as I looked over at Dylan, still asleep beside me, I realized something. Maybe there were no easy answers. Maybe love, real love, was always meant to be messy, complicated, and devastating. But it was ours. And then came the knock on the door. Edward's face appeared on the other side, pale and drawn, his eyes full of something I didn't recognize. He wasn't angry. He was broken. "I've been waiting for you to come back," he said, voice low and cracked. "But now I see you never will." My heart cracked in two. I could see it in his eyes, the realization that the life we had built was over. And I knew there was no going back for any of us. The weeks that followed were filled with a tense quietness. We stayed at a small house outside the city, a place Dylan had rented just for us. It wasn't much, a modest little cottage surrounded by trees and silence. The kind of place where you could disappear from the world, if only for a while. But even in this new life, I felt the weight of what I had left behind. Edward's absence was deafening, and in the stillness of our new life, I often found myself wondering if I'd made the right choice. Dylan was all passion and fire, but sometimes, late at night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wishing for something that could never be. Was this freedom, or was it just another form of imprisonment? One day, as I sat by the window, watching the rain fall outside, there was a knock at the door. It was a sound I'd been dreading, a sound that would change everything. When I opened it, I found Edward standing there, his eyes tired and hollow, his face etched with the weight of betrayal. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to live this way." I didn't answer. I couldn't. But Dylan appeared behind me, his presence darkening the doorway. "Leave," he said, his voice cold. "This is between us." Edward's eyes flicked to Dylan, then back to me, as if trying to understand the mess we had created. "You can't run away from this," Edward continued, his voice breaking. "You can't run away from me." "I don't want to," I whispered, "but I can't stay anymore." And that was the moment everything shattered. Edward turned, his back to me, and I saw the defeat in his posture. I saw the man who had loved me but never truly understood me. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to take it all back. But I couldn't. In the days that followed, Dylan and I tried to make a life together. We built a routine. We found our rhythm. But something was missing. Every so often, when Dylan was away, I'd find myself standing by the window, looking out into the distance, wondering if I'd made a mistake. Edward's words echoed in my mind, haunting me. You can't run away from this. And I realized he was right. I couldn't run forever. I couldn't hide from the truth, no matter how much I tried. Months passed, and the quiet settled into a different kind of unease. Dylan began to grow restless. I could see the change in him, the hunger in his eyes, the need for something more than I could give him. We were both broken in different ways, and I feared we were only pulling each other further apart. It was the inevitable end. It was a cool evening when Dylan finally left. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't explain. He simply walked out, leaving me alone in the house we had built together, with only the sound of the rain against the windows to keep me company. I sat on the couch, staring at the empty space beside me. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger or rage. I just felt empty, like a part of me had been severed, and now I was left with the remnants of what could have been. Months later, I found myself back in the house I once shared with Edward. He was sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of wine in his hand, staring out at the rain. "I never thought I'd see you here again," he said softly. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I was here for him or for myself. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He nodded, as though he had been waiting for those words for a long time. But there was no bitterness in his gaze, no anger, just a sadness that seemed to fill the entire room. "I don't know if we can fix this," he said, his voice low. "But I'll try, if you want to." And there, in that moment, I realized something. I had run. I had chased something wild and impossible, thinking it would set me free. But freedom wasn't what I needed. I needed healing. I needed the one thing I'd spent so long running from, the quiet, steady love that I had once had with Edward. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. But as I sat there, facing Edward, I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us to rebuild. Not to go back to what we were, but to move forward, together. In a way, I had come full circle, and maybe that was enough. End. Thank you all for listening to our late night stories, our affairs, our love stories.